Okay, welcome to technical lecture number 6. Today we're going to be doing some three-dimensional modeling using the software 3D Studio Max. We'll introduce you to the workings of it, the user interface, and potential outputs. So we've worked through in the last 5 or 6 weeks a plethora of techniques using raster and vector software, mainly in 2 dimensions. And just this week we did work in InDesign, which is the layout software that we recommend, especially for assignment 2. And we're now going to be showing you some 3D mesh modeling and 3D mesh modeling manipulation tools that we can generate more 2-dimensional drawings from and 3-dimensional perspectival drawings. And this is kind of your initiation into the world of 3D modeling, the pitfalls associated with it, and the potentials, which are really, really exciting. And the biggest objective for us is to actually start to help you guys define a drawing process or a visualization process that is yours ultimately. So we'll push straight over into the software. I've just opened up Autodesk 3D Studio Max and I'm working in 2011 64-bit version. There's 2012 out now. The software package is usually updated every year, so definitely download 2012 and have a look. Download 2011 and download 2010. Just get familiar with how the software packages change year to year. So the first thing that I should take you through is the user interface. We have all of our file creation options available by clicking in the top left corner, so we can make new documents, we can reset the document, save, and there's some importing and export stuff that we'll get through in a minute. This here is the main toolbar. So most of the commands that you'll come across, navigation techniques fall within these menus, as well as being able to be activated from a series of icons. Okay, so this is called the main toolbar. The next thing down the side, this is the command panel, and on this command panel we have creation tools under the first tab. So this is where we start to make things like boxes very, very simply, and we can generate 2-dimensional line work, we can create lights, cameras, and there's some particular systems, one in particular called the daylight system, which we'll use. Then we can modify all that geometry using things under the Modify tab, but we'll get into that in a minute. Moving further around the screen, down in the bottom right corner here, we've got 8 little tiny icons, and they're all our navigation tools, okay, or our I think they're called visualization or viewport tools. So one of them here, second from right, is the orbit tool. Okay, so it brings up this little yellow thing and we can actually spin around the environment. And we've got a little thing called a VIewcube up here in the top right corner. And just the same as in AutoCAD, by clicking particular sides of that cube or these little rotation arrows, we can navigate around the viewport. We can toggle to 4 viewports at once, and there's some other options that we'll come across. Moving a bit further around, we've got a series of animation tools. Okay, so 3D Studio Max is a fantastic tool for not only exporting and manipulating 3D objects in the way of a mesh and creating quite stunning 2-dimensional images. It's a great tool for animating. Okay, so hopefully towards the end of the semester we can have some fun with that. The whole environment is built up on a world coordinate system, just as we went through in earlier lectures. It's all Cartesian. It's all based on the Cartesian coordinate system. That little dot in the very, very middle is 0, 0, 0, and it goes out in all directions from there. That's where this little thing comes in. So we can actually, if we create a piece of geometry eventually, we can locate that by putting in an exact figure as to its relationship to the environment that it sits in. And then we've got this other little section here called the status bar, and depending on which command you actually have activated, the command bar will, the status bar will have a series of instructions that will help you. Now, as for the color of my user interface, it might be a little bit different to yours. It just depends on where you're working and how you want to work. I prefer a darker environment. Under the Customize tab, we can go down to Custom UI or User Interface and Default Switcher, and we can actually change to a light theme. I've got this one, which is the dark theme, and there's some other ones that are a little bit older, and they've got particular configurations of toolbars that you may or may not find handy, so have a bit of a look at those. And when you choose one, you can also further customize things like colors and shortcut keys on the keyboard using the Customize User Interface button. So here's all, we can actually create hotkeys for particular commands we use very often, customize toolbars and the layout of a lot of these buttons. And the last one's really important, I think. It's finding a color theme that actually suits you. I mean, you're going to be looking at this environment day in, day out for a long time, so make sure that you're happy with the colors that you're actually working with. So you can see my background here is dark gray. You might want to match it to CAD, so you move it through to black, and you can apply the color of that, and you can see then there's particular elements like the central grid lines that have been the same color, and you lose the ability to see those. So it's there's a reason why it's kind of refined to a particular color suite as it is, and then you can load and save those as you see fit. The last part of the user interface that I should point out is this big window here, or if you've opened it, you might actually find that there's 4 of them. Okay, so these are the viewports. To navigate around the viewports, we've just gone through that before, but we use these little icons, so you can actually use zoom to zoom in and out. You can also scroll your mouse wheel in to zoom in and out. You can pan across a scene by clicking the scroll wheel on your mouse, okay? And you can activate each window to work within by clicking the scroll wheel as well. Now, just jump back out to there. There's also the shortcut Alt-W that will toggle between the 4 viewports and the single viewport, depending on which one you've highlighted, of course. So let's create some geometry. Before we kick off creating any geometry, what we want to do is just customize the unit setup. Okay, just like you do in AutoCAD when you write the word units, you set that 1 unit equals 1 millimeter. Well, in this environment, it's exactly the same. You have to specify under this button here what 1 unit represents. Okay, and we're going to say millimeters. There's a further to this. We've also got the display unit scale. So what scale it's actually displayed at, and you'll get an understanding of this when we start to mess around with it. So that might be as inches in default. Just drop it down to millimeters. Okay. So this little home grid will be set still to probably millimeters. It'll be really, really small. So I may reset that in just a sec. But let's just jump in and create something. First thing we're going to do is create a box. Okay, so to create a box in this bit of software, 3D Studio Max, we click right where we want it. Then we hold the mouse button down. I'm holding the mouse button down, and then we release when we've actually got to a point that we're happy with as far as how big the base of this object is. Now, while the command's still activated, right? So I haven't got any mouse buttons pressed down, but you can see that the geometry is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's kind of linked to this movement on the mouse. Okay, so I just need to do one more click, and that finishes the command. All right. So it kind of stands for a lot of geometry that we create. So we're going to create a sphere. It's just a simple click and drag operation. When you do things that are a little bit more complex, such as a tube, I think, there's a series of commands. So you usually do a click and drag one, a release, a set in with a click, and then a drag up with the mouse and another click. Okay, so just it's easier if you just get in and have a bit of a play with creating some of this geometry. Same thing with a pyramid. There's a few commands that actually do that. All right, so an important part of navigating, okay, and the way that I actually navigate in orbit is I hold the button Alt, okay, and then I click down on the middle mouse button, and we can orbit around the scene. All right, I can hit the Z button to zoom in on a particular object, or I can actually use this little button down the bottom called Zoom Extent Selected. I can deselect everything by clicking into the grey area, and I can just hit Z and it will focus on all four of these bits of geometry. Okay, so when I'm creating these, you'll see that I can actually input, say I've created another box over here, the parameters control over here how big that option is. Okay, so we're doing something that's about 9 centimeters by 10 centimeters by about 8 centimeters in height. Very small little objects, okay, almost desk size. All right. If you happen to deselect those things, the geometry that you create, you can modify by activating the next tab along. All right. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the color of these objects. And now this has nothing to do with the output, it's just how they are displayed on your screen. I can click this little icon up the top right corner. Now I'm one across, don't forget that, I'm on the Modifier tab. And then I just click there, and I'm going to change it to like a light green or something, okay, just so it shows up a bit easier on your screens. If I want to actually change the size of, say, this box, as long as I'm on the Modifier tab, I can enter different parameters. Okay, I can enter a numeric value, or I can just drag these sliders like so. Alright, if I want to delete some geometry, I can actually click and drag in the viewport and highlight the objects, and I can press delete, okay, on my keyboard. Now, as far as selecting particular objects, alright, on the issue of selecting, you can click on an object and you can click outside of the object to deselect it. In the main toolbar, these four icons are four different ways that you can actually select objects. Okay, the first one's just select object, so that's what we've been using. Select by name, and naming conventions become very important when you have a lot of geometry in a scene. But let's say I want to select the sphere, I can just click sphere 1 and hit OK. You can see there it's selected. If I wanted to select the tube and the sphere, let's say, I hold control, I can do multiple objects, like so. And then there's also the click and drag, or the kind of marquee banner selections, or the region selections. And there's a whole variety of them. So you can actually select by a circular selection, like so. It's a bit odd. Otherwise, if there's a lot of objects quite close together, you could use a polygon selection. Just with a few clicks, you can go around and choose objects, like so. Now you'll notice one thing that happened then, and that's because I've got this little toggle on window. Alright, so that's the fourth selection option. So there's window selections and there's crossing selections. A window selection will only select things within the window. Okay, so you can see there the only things that fall within that marquee will be selected. If you use the crossing option, it's anything that selected region will touch. Okay, so even if you're actually just on the very, very corner of it. So just make sure you're familiar with those selection tools. So I'll just do a bit of a review of creating some things, okay? So the reason I probably just jumped ahead a little bit too quickly then was to make sure we can get to selection tools and just show you those. Now we'll just work a little bit more with creation. I'll go back to my Create tab. You'll notice here that there's 10 different default primitives. There's also drop-downs, which have many other objects that we can actually create. we then have shapes as well, and I'll show you shapes in just a second. So let's create a box that's about 3 meters by 3 meters by 3 meters. I can create a box like so, and if I happen to deselect it, which is usually a good routine to get into, I can jump over to my Modify tab, like so. I can give it another name, 3 by 3 box 001, which is, just in case I create a whole heap of them. And I can edit the parameters. I can write exactly how big this thing is. So I can write 3 by 3 by 3. Now over here you can see that it's bled out the entire scene. Alright? It's because the point of view from which I'm viewing this box is now within the box. I can simply hit Z, or I can actually hit zoom extents to actually jump out and have a look at that box. And again, I'm just going to change the color so it's easier for you guys to see. And I'm going to toggle to 4 viewports, okay? And I'm going to hit zoom extents all, okay? Now you'll see that we've got a top view of the box, a left view, and a right. They're all the same because the box is uniform. If I change the length of one side to 4 meters, you'll see that the left view is now a bit longer than these ones, etc. Quite standard. I can toggle the grid off hitting the G button once I've selected these windows here. And I can also alter what's called the visual style of how I see these boxes. You'll see that the top view, the front view, and the left view, they're all viewed as what's called wireframe. If we actually click on that little word, we can change the way that we see the box. This one's smooth and highlights at the moment. We've just changed that one to smooth and highlights. Now you can actually change it to edged faces with smooth and highlights, which is actually quite a handy way to work, because then what we do is we have another line which outlines every mesh face that makes up this piece of geometry. I'll just jump back over to 4 views using my maximize viewport toggle button in the bottom right corner. And with smooth and highlights plus edged faces on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through how you can actually remesh this box or create more faces or more complexity to make up the shape. So by default, I should say all objects within Max, anything that's a standard primitive or a compound object or an extended primitive, they're all mesh-based objects. Okay, so a mesh is a surface, I guess, that's made up of either 3 or 4 vertice points, and the surface is then made from that. By default, this box here is made up of 6 mesh faces. Okay, but I can change that by actually altering within the Modifier tab the length segments, the width segments, and the height segments. Alright, now that I've got smooth highlights and edge faces on, I can see that happen. So I'm actually adding more faces in the length direction, more in the width, and more segments in the height. Okay, so now where I used to have 1 mesh face, or 4 points making up that whole surface, I've now got 36 making up that whole surface. It adds memory to the program because there's more vertices, more lines, but that's okay because computers are quite fast these days and can handle it. And I guess the next thing is, why would we do that? Now, a lot of this geometry we modify from a standard state to a complex state. Okay, and within the Modifier tab, there's a drop-down menu here that lets us add little scripts to these standard shapes that will alter it in a particular way. The more mesh faces that we have on these objects, then the higher degree of resolution we have to a transformation or a modification. So I'll demonstrate first of all taper, so you get an idea. So there's the taper modifier all the way down the stack, and you can see that the word taper is now popped up on top of box. Okay, and if I highlight taper, I can now change the amount of taper. Alright, so it's just tapering off that object. Okay, you can see that those faces, those vertices are all changing accordingly. I can then change the axis in which that happens, like so. So what I'll do is I'll turn on limits here, which is another parameter. Turn on the limit effect. You can see that the upper limit is 0, so in the world coordinate system, 0 is the bottom of the box, and it's also set as the lower limit. So if I start to bring that up, so let's start bringing it up by 1, it'll mean that it only tapers to a height in the z direction of 1. Okay, so you can get a little bit more control over how you actually modify through the parameters, and the more some modifiers have many parameters, especially things like the edit polygon mesh modifier, which we'll push into in a few weeks, or maybe even next week. So what I'm going to do is then put another modifier on top of that, and this time I'm going to put bend. Now you can see that a box comes up around the object. Okay, and here we go, we can actually start to bend the geometry just by changing the angle. So if I bend it all the way to 90, it's bent the geometry. We'll look at it in 4 viewports. I'll put that value in. So this face is actually 90 degrees to that one. If we bend it in the y direction, oops, sorry, you can see that the same thing happens, but it bends around a different axis. Okay, and we can actually change the limit effect again by specifying where it actually starts. So let's say we have the limit effect there. You can see that it actually changes. Now sometimes you'll also find that geometry folds in on itself, and it's not a desired way to work. Okay, so if you start to get these really irregular folds, it'll lead to problems when you actually come to actually export these things. Okay, so just know that there's a whole heap of these that you can play with, just to modify standard geometries or standard primitives that come with it. And if you actually alter the order of these, there's different effects. Okay, so you can drag and drop these little names to say when they occur within the hierarchy of the modifications. You can also turn some off and turn them on, which becomes handy. So have a bit of a play with that, and if you actually come across one that you don't actually understand, hit F1 or help, go to Autodesk 3D Studio Max Design Help, and actually learn about what it is. Okay, even in that index, say we were to write in bend and go to the bend modifier, you can see that it has a breakdown of exactly what to do with little movies displaying what actually happens when you do it, when you apply the effect. Okay, so why have more segments to a shape? I guess it's most clear when, as I said before, when you have modifiers on it. I've jumped down the stack back to box. If I change this back to 1, 1, and 1, you'll see that the resolution of the bend and the taper are stretched from point to point. The more segments we have between that, if we get it in the right direction, will smooth out the curve. Okay, and you can keep going until it's absolutely as smooth as you want. Alright, so we can see this profile of the curve here. Because we've got 28 height segments, is really smooth. When we have less height segments, it becomes more faceted. So you can use that to your advantage, but just make sure you know about it.